Welcome to Watercolour Splashes. I'm Lorraine Brown and my artist life is all about watercolour. There is never just one way to paint, but in Watercolour Splashes I will show you what works for me, with tips, techniques and experiments that you can try for yourself. Be inspired. Let's watercolour splash. In this Watercolour Splashes demonstration, we're going to look at a couple of things. We're going to be painting this cute alpaca face. We're going to be painting from a black and white reference image, and we're going to be using a limited palette. The other thing, I'm also going to paint this without using masking fluid. Now, for those of you that don't know what masking fluid is, it is a preparation that you can put on your paper, and it acts as a resist. So when you paint, it won't go through this resist to the paper. And when you're finished your painting, you rub off the masking fluid and you're left with the white paper underneath. I love the challenge of painting without it, because I feel like I'm being, my observation skills are good and I'm being careful, but also I hate the time it takes to put this on, wait a few minutes for it to dry. I hate the fact then that you've got to take it off and still adjust the shapes of the white paper that's been left behind. So whenever I possibly can, I don't use it. So today we're going to be painting the alpaca without it. You might wonder, well, where would I need it in the first place? Well, the alpaca has two really lovely big front teeth here that are sitting inside a very dark shape. So we'd want to keep those lovely two white teeth in amongst this. The alpaca is a white alpaca, has colour obviously up in his fur up here, but on the top of his muzzle, it's very white. There's little highlights in the eyes. They would be the places that you possibly would use the masking fluid, or where you're going to have to paint carefully. So we're going to paint carefully today. My first step, which is something that I do with every single painting that I do, unless I've painted it very recently and I already have this worked out, I always work out my colours. If I work out my colours first, it means that when I start painting, I can be a bit intuitive. I don't have to switch my brain over to working out what it is I'm going to need. So if I know an image has got a lot or something that's very, very dark in it, one of my first thoughts is, well, how am I going to paint the dark? Well, this alpaca has got very dark eyes. I know that they would be a bit brown. They look black in the photograph, but they would be a bit brown. So I know I'm going to use my burnt sienna. And here's my burnt sienna here. And added to that burnt sienna to make my darks, my favourite black, grey, is using French ultramarine blue. So when I have these two colours, I can get a grey. I can make it more of a bluey grey, or I can make it a browner grey. But if I use them in a creamy consistency, I can get a very nice black. So I know that by using those two colours, I'm going to be able to get the darks. I'm going to be able to get colours for my eyes. I'm going to be able to use the darks down in here for the hair in the white parts of the nose. I could probably add another colour to it. And this is going to be a limited palette painting, so really there's three things here. We've got a limited palette, We've got using no masking fluid, we're painting a white subject. So we're covering everything here. So the only other colour I'm going to use in here will be something like my Permanent Rose. These three are such staple colours for me. I use them just about in every painting, one form or another. So I've got Burnt Sienna, French Ultramarine and Permanent Rose. And these happen to all be Winsor and Newton colours. But with that pink, if I add a bit of that to my dark that I've made here, look at that pretty neutrally colour that's now leaning towards a pink shade, which is what I'm going to add for some interest in here. Painting from a black and white photograph as opposed to painting from a colour one means that you're actually going to make your personal colour choices and not be influenced by what you're seeing on the photograph. You are going to be able to observe tone and value in an image easier because you really are just looking at dark, light and in-betweens, mid-tones, lights and darks. So you're going to make all of the decisions based on that pattern of lights and darks as opposed to, well, should it be green, should it be red, should it be blue and so forth. So we've got our colour choices sorted. We've got our reference image. I've done a quick sketch onto this small piece of paper here. This is actually on a piece of 425 GSM paper because I painted a series called Mini Me's, and this will probably be a mini me if it turns out okay. So I've got it cut to the size that I need. So I'm all ready to start. Whatever means you use to get your initial sketch on your piece of watercolour paper, whether you've traced it or you've used a light box or you've free drawn it, it always pays to just take off a little bit of the graphite with a kneaded eraser, just so that it doesn't mix in with your paints. Any loose pieces of graphite will come off. Now to start this, I will probably start with the real darks, just so I've got a sort of a little bit of a map of where I'm going. I love all of these white and grey hairs that he's got down here in his mouth area too. So, but I think I'll start with the real darks, and then I've got something really appearing before me on here. As far as brushes go, this is a really small piece of paper. So when it's a small piece of paper, I will probably not go much bigger than a size 8. I do have a mop brush here too that I might use. It doesn't even have a number left on it. This is my sable brush that's in an 8. So about size 8s will do this for me. I've got a smaller brush here, which is a number 4, that will possibly be okay if I've got to get in some little areas in the eye, or I want to leave that highlight in the eye. So that'll be my range of brushes. This will be a combination of probably painting on dry paper for some of it and wet into wet for some of it. But I'm going to start off with the eyes. I like to start with the eyes because when I can see an eye appearing in front of me, I feel like my painting is already coming alive. So I'm going to start off with some burnt sienna. That's sort of about milk to cream consistency. And whilst I may not end up with the same shape of the highlights in the eye, I will try to keep some white unpainted part as a highlight. So there's the brown gone down. Put it down on the other side as well. Now this eye is a little higher on the piece of paper, but that's simply because this alpaca's got his head tilted. So with his head tilted, it's going to make it look like one eye is higher up than the other. And we'll get a little highlight in the eye on this one. Got have left it a little bit bigger, but there we go, that's what we've got. And this one here possibly could come down a little bit lower. There we go. So there's the brown gone in and left a tiny little highlight. So I'll rinse my brush off. I'll now go into the blue because I know that my brown and my blue is going to give me a nice dark. So I will drop in the blue. So this is going to turn this eye pretty much into a black or very dark shape. And I'm just dropping it off of the brush. It's catching the wet paint that's on there. If it doesn't look to the colour that you want, so it doesn't look black, maybe it looks too brown, you just drop a little bit more blue in there. But as it touches the wet paint that's there, it will do a nice little bit of mingling by itself, which is better than mixing your black or your dark round and round and round here. The other eye, by doing little strokes for a little shape and dropping it in, it's going to make some of it browner, some of it bluer, and some of it quite mixed. When this dries, you can always readjust then and say, oh, I wish it was a little bit bluer or a little bit browner or whatever that you want. But by putting the eyes down first, all of a sudden I've got something looking at me, and I like the idea of that as I paint. It's got such a funny face, we might as well have a look at it. Let's at the same time do these nostrils. Now it is a really dark shape on here, but we certainly wouldn't want too black nostrils. So this is where we would bring a little bit of the pink in there. So we get our creamy paint, and I may well just mix these together first to get my dark colour. Rinse off my brush and just get a little bit of the pink and put that in there. Now that's looking too purple. You can test out your colours here. Maybe looking a little purple, so I'll go just get it a little bit darker looking. Sometimes you've got to go a little bit round and round and round to get exactly what it is that you want. There we are, I'm getting a little bit there now. So I've got a dark colour, but it's not black, it's more pinky colour. And I'll put this nostril in here and one over this side. And then I'll rinse off my brush so there's no paint on there and it's just damp. I dab it on this piece of clean paper towel here, and I'm just going to touch the edge of it and let it bleed down to this part of his nose down here. Touch that edge and let it just soften down to this part here. And then I want it to turn a little bit grayer, so I'll add a bit of blue. And where this white fur here is coming up into it, because I haven't used masking fluid, I need to go and save some of that white paper. So I will use this wet nostril to come downwards. If it's looking a little bit purple, which mine is, I would just, you can't go wrong if you're only using 3 colours because they're all going to be on your palette. All you've got to do is decide, well, it's gone a little bit pink, it's gone a little bit brown, it's gone a little bit blue, and choose something to change your colour. So over this side here, if I take the wet nostril and I just let some of it Come back down here, I'm making the dark hairs on his nose, but saving the white shapes for the white hairs. So I'll come down here with this almost join or seam in his nose area here, and the same thing coming out this way now. If I come backwards, I can still save some of the white paper to be the white hairs. I'd like to go a little bit bluer. Just touch it in like this. So I've saved some of the white paper around that dark area. I can now use a bit of water to bring over onto here, onto the cleaner area of his nose. There. A little bit darker up here. There we are, so I'll leave that alone for a little bit. Whilst that's wet there, I wouldn't want to touch too much more in there because I definitely want to make sure I retain the white here and the white there. Now up on the top of the nose here, it's really the same sort of thing. So dipping into either the blue, the brown, the reddy blue, the reddy brown, a grey, touching down here. It's very, very dark just there actually, so we'll just put a little bit more colour on the base of this here, on the base of his nose there, and the same thing here. I've turned my brush to the side. I'm going to just drag up that paint and let that be dark parts in amongst his white wool, fur, whatever, here, around the top of the nostril there, up here. So everywhere I can see that it's not brilliant white, it's actually got dark hair in there, I will do this. Now when you're painting these dark shapes, if you get it slightly different shape to what is on here, so your alpaca's got a couple more grey hairs, doesn't matter. This is not an exacting issue here. If you were painting somebody's pet and it's definitely got to look like them, yes, well, I could understand why you wouldn't want to give it a slightly different colouring. But if you're painting something like this, it's not going to matter. So we're going to leave that to dry for a little bit because I certainly don't want to lose all of the white of my unpainted paper. But I needed to tone here. I can already see that it's not dark enough. So I could let it dry and add some more, or I could go in and add a bit more now, which I will do. If you add it when it's wet like this, it will stay soft looking and not like strokes of paint. You won't see the brush marks, it will soften and look a little more natural. So that's looking a little bit better. Remembering that watercolour dries about 25% lighter when it's dry than what you're seeing when it's wet. So that's one of the things that we have to be able to do in watercolour. We've got to be able to trust ourselves that we're seeing what we want for the finish, not whilst it's happening. And that just takes practice. So let's go down with this dark colour now and just define the bottom of his nose here. I'm mindful of this lovely white tooth. So I'm going around the shape of the tooth and of the other tooth. So in effect, I'm not painting the teeth, I'm painting around the teeth. And I'll vary the colour that I'm putting in here as well, because I don't want the inside of his mouth just to look like a cut out black hole. So I'm using that same pinky dark mixture to go in here. Come out up there. This part coming down between his teeth here gets a little bit wider there. And now we're going to start softening up the other way. So we have the line for the bottom of the nose here, where it hits his mouth, where his mouth is open. But we've now got to do some darker hair, wool, I think it's wool, up in here. So flicking the paint in and leaving white pieces. White pieces, because basically he is a white alpaca with some grey hair. If you see the strokes going sideways, just get your brush to go in a sideways motion. If the hair is going straight down, paint your strokes going straight down. When we paint white subjects in watercolour, sometimes it's very hard to see if we've added the darks dark enough when we've got a lot of white paper still left to cover. So sometimes that will mean just having to go back in and add more later. But for now, that looks dark enough to me for now. I've got to now start working on this area under here. So his bottom lip is very hairy and the strokes come downwards with a little bit of a very dark area here. These strokes are going to go up and these strokes are going to come down. So if I just put a small bit of dark paint there, using the same colours I've already got on here, see, by having worked out the colours first means we don't have to be thinking, all we've got to be doing is observing, but we don't have to be thinking what the colours need to be because we've got it worked out. So now I look at this shape here and I will come downward from my dark that I've used in the mouth there. I will use some of that paint and come downwards. I'd like it to look a little bluer. So I'll just add a wee bit of blue into here, so that when I'm borrowing this paint to come down here to do my dark grey hair that's coming down into his mouth, it will be bluer. And I can go upwards and outwards from here. So all I'm doing is following the way that the hair is growing. Upwards or downwards. A bit darker, add a bit more paint so that you've got a bit more paint to do your strokes with. Upwards or downwards, making sure that you can try and leave some of the white of the paper to give the indication of the white hairs amongst the dark hairs. Now this shape here is now going to form, it can be really dark going up a bit in there, so we can mix that around a bit more. But this area here now starts coming down this way. So now we will flick our hair strokes, do our brush strokes down this way. After all, we're sort of illusionists. We've got to use this piece of flat paper here to bring something to life using our paint and our clever brush strokes. But if we follow the way that something grows underneath this whole muzzle area, nose area, I'm not sure what the parts of an alpaca are called, but I'm looking at down here where it's really dark. If I put more dark paint down here, same colours, the blue, the brown, little bit of pink, just use what you've got here. The good thing is about using what you've already got out is it's all going to work for you, but it's going to be varied. It's going to go down differently in different sections, which is going to help it be interesting. So I'm working on this little bit down here, which I can't see beyond my picture, but I can see what that is it's enabling more hair, white hair, to come upwards this way. So we've got downwards, upwards, and it's going to separate his face area here from his neck. I think basically that's what that's doing. So I can come down here, underneath here, and now I've got his face area separate from here. And he's a white alpaca, so if I left it totally white paper, he wouldn't have much form to him, and he'd be one very, very clean looking alpaca. So I don't have to leave all white paper. I've still got to be able to put in some of these colours, to show his form and show his colouring. So here, this should be his eye coming out up there, and a bit more of this round here. So sometimes with a white subject, don't forget you can just use toned dirty water to help you find your shape. You don't even need to put down lots of paint that you're then thinking, whoa, that's a bit too much and now I've got to get rid of it. Use your dirty water to help you find where it is that you want to go. So you can see he's got a neck now, he's got a face, he's got a nose, and his eyes are there. So we could start working on the top here. We're pretty much getting to be a shape of him all over. So again, just dipping into all of these three colours here, bits of this, bits of that, but they all go together. I will start getting something going in under the eye here. Whilst I've got the same colour, I will come there, and then I will now bring some of this down because I see colour in down here, and the same over here. So I put a little bit of paint down and I tickle it around with a damp brush, letting it find a way of settling. And the whole time you've got moisture in the paper, and you're adding paint to it, you can manipulate it around. Doesn't matter if you get a few funny little watermarks because it's fur, and that could be handy. It would help you get a little bit of texture of what you want on there, and that will work fine too. So I'm just going to drop a bit of, almost looks like big bags or something he's got under his eyes, which I'm sure it's not that, but I don't know. This is alpaca, so I can't really be sure what the marks are, but I'm just painting tones really. I'm painting darks, mediums, and leaving the white for the really lights. And that's what it is, painting any white subject. So just keep manoeuvring around. Manoeuvring around, just bringing out where you can see an opportunity is to add a little bit of colour, and I mean a little bit of colour. You're better off to put less down and manoeuvre it around with the water and see if it's enough than to put too much down and try and take it off. So to get this white part of the nose up here to stand out, it's got to be darker behind it. So he's got needs to be darker up here. And now I'm going to a bit more brown, just for a bit of variety, and because his wool is, and it's the same thing up here actually. You can still do a little bit of taking the paint back into the white fur so that you are leaving some bits white, but when you get to the fur on the alpaca's head, or the wool on the alpaca, this is where it does actually turn to wool, curly wool. So we get a little bit of the hair here, but I definitely want it to look like wool when I get going up here. Curly wool is what I'm after. So that's the part coming round, defining the top of his nose here. Muzzle, nose, not sure. And now we're going to try and do this curly fur, and then we can come back and just finish here when it's dry. A little bit of modelling in his teeth so they're not quite so, look at my perfectly white teeth. And decide whether to put a background on it or not. But I'd like to get something going on up in here. So I won't use this little tiny brush for that. I'm going to go for something like the sable. It's softer, it's good for doing washes. And what I'm going to do with this is I'm actually going to wet, not all over so that the whole piece up here is wet, but I'm just going to dance around with my brush, already thinking I'm making curls with water, and following the way it looks like his wool is growing. And the whole time I'm using the water here, I'm already thinking curls, hairstyle, and I haven't even added any paint to it yet. But when I start adding the paint, it will find the water, and where the water is, the paint will go, but where I've left it dry, it will stay white. So, going for this mixture, if I just drop a little bit in, touching where I've added water, I can still vary this colour. And we're giving the illusion now of this being curly, wild, definitely wild hairdo. And just a few strokes, trying to leave the white as much as I can where I think it needs to be. Just manipulating around a small bit of paint because I want him to be a white alpaca, but with obviously wool that's got some shades, because you're actually painting the depths of the wool here, and trying to give the illusion that it's all curly or dense, and you're painting the shadowy bits in between all of the wool. That's probably enough at the moment to sort of say what it is, I think. So I'm saying at the moment. So I will just take a minute just to reassess what I've got going here before I do too much more and worry that I've done too much. Better to do less, have a breather, look at it and say, oh, I could have been a bit stronger there with my pigment. I could have put a bit more in, than to have gone too heavy and can't backtrack. Okay, so now I'll have a little rest from it and have a little look at my photo, look at my animal and see if they're even starting to resemble each other. It definitely is an alpaca. It may not be that alpaca. I can see that the mouth isn't wide enough. If I come out here now with the mouth a little bit wider and a bit wider on this side, we'll be fine as long as I don't hit wet paper and end up with a much bigger mouth than what I wanted. But if I look here, the edge of his mouth should be out more with the edge of his nostril. So it's more like that. And really the same on this side. It's looking a little bit better. And then I've got to shade this down under here so it actually is his mouth. And maybe the same over here. Downward, leaving a bit of white hair in between. Now I've made his mouth wider. I'm going to look at this area up in here and decide, do I want it darker? Now, just because this alpaca is very, very dark here, you may decide when you're painting this that you don't want it to be quite as dark. Well, they're the decisions that we're allowed to make. Just because we're working from a photograph doesn't mean to say we have to be a slave to it. Yes, we want to use it to get our shapes, to tell what it is that we're painting, but we don't let it have to dictate everything that we do. We make choices of our own, depending on really what we want. So there we are. So I'm going to go a wee bit darker up here, just above his nose here, just a few extra little dark bits in here. And a little bit in there. This is still wet here, so this is going to still dry a little soft, which is fine. And if it doesn't, you've only got to rinse your brush off, tap off the extra moisture and soften it. Now, where it comes into the top of his muzzle or nose here, I'll just put a little line of that in there, just as a little bit of form work going in there. I'm quite happy with that. Yes, I'm not as dark here. Does that matter? Not really, but it could look a bit more interesting if they were flicking out a wee bit more there. So flick them out. Twist your brush around extra strokes and decide when you think you've done enough. Let's finish up at the eyes and then decide what we're going to do, if we're going to do a background. Up here, could just jump back to that a minute. If I go back up to this part up here, this still could be a wee bit darker just in here. And soften it and flick a bit of that paint backwards for some strokes. Upwards. Soften if they look too hard. Right, I'm quite happy with that. Let's finish off the eyes. At the moment they are just looking like two big, very, very dark blobs. So I think they probably need some eyelashes. That's probably what they're looking for. Now the eyelashes on here, he's got some dark eyelashes, but he got some light eyelashes. I can't do much about the light ones because I'm not using masking fluid, so I haven't saved white paper. But I could do something about his eyebrow. It's dry enough, I think. And just bring a few dark lines out from the eyes this way. Now he's got some eyelashes going, even if they are a little bit darker than what I see here. You can paint darker eyelashes if you can't paint white ones, and there's nothing wrong with that. I'm going to come down here, just give him a little bit more of a bit here, and the same up here. Let's come out from the top of here. And enable us to do a few strokes out this way. I'll probably darken this area up here. I shouldn't be whispering on this recording, but this is me talking to myself. Okay, I think for a quick demo, I'm probably just about there. So I did mention we would have to shade the teeth a little bit. They're not going to be perfectly clean like that, as if he's never eaten anything. So they're a tiny little area of white, but you could add a wee bit of water and then just drop a little bit of any of these colours here, really. And just add a wee bit of shadow colour to his teeth. So that one's on wet and it hasn't really done much at all, so I will just put this one on to the dry tooth. And there's a wee little bit across the top. And on this one. So we've still got two white teeth, but they have got some shading on there, which means he does eat, and they have got dirty. Okay, so now your decision is, do I add a background or don't I add a background? I hadn't really thought about whether I was going to do a background for this tiny painting. Sometimes with my mini-me's, they're all about just the subject. The background doesn't really matter. Sometimes they've got to have something if they're a bird sitting on a branch or whatever. Sometimes with something like this alpaca here, he may well have needed some colouring behind him to bring out the fact that he's white. But with clever sort of shading, we've been able to show that he's a white alpaca because we've left plenty of white, but we've added greys, and his form has come out okay, and you can see him on the paper, so I really don't have to add a background if I don't want, and I'm probably not going to. I rather like him as is. So there we go, one alpaca. Probably when it's totally dry, I may just, I might tweak, be tempting to tweak, but one shouldn't. One should be happy and leave it. Both eyes, they're looking a little brown when I look at them here, and I'm not sure, the pupil isn't all of this, but there would be a pupil in amongst this bit up here somewhere. So I'm going to paint just blue where I think the pupil would be, so that the browny black turns a little blacker in a couple of areas. And that's it. I think I'm going to call that done. So we've painted a white subject with just 3 colours, our burnt sienna, French ultramarine blue and permanent rose. We've mixed up varying shades from those 3 colours, used it right throughout the little painting. We've retained the white of the paper without the use of masking fluid, and we have managed to get a white subject. Thank you for watching another little demo with my watercolour splashes series. See you next time.